All I need is somewhere I can have total isolation, and above all, atmosphere.
What lives in this house?
No one would want to live in Balpater Manor.
What stalks these halls?
It's a cursed place.
Yes, I saw the movie.
What hides in these shadows? And who is playing that piano? Welcome to the House of the Long Shadows, home of mystery, suspense, danger. And now the four masters of horror are moving in. Vincent Price.
We came here this evening to unlock the final door to our destiny.
Christopher Lee.
It would seem, Mr. McGee, that we are imprisoned here.
Peter Cushing.
It is all I have ever known. Fear.
John Carradine.
Death is our only true destiny.
Joined by Desi Arnaz.
You ain't seen nothing yet.
House of the Long Shadows.
You could lose your life.
Worse.
Will this talented young man wager his very life for one night with this girl and these strange bedfellows? House of the Long Shadows.
There's one missing.
What is its diabolical secret?
And suddenly, out he jumped. He didn't even look human.
Which key unlocks the horrible truth?
I'm afraid it has begun.
And who spiked the punch? House of the Long Shadows. It's delightfully puzzling.
It would appear that you are creating a mystery where there is none.
And a frightfully good time.
He must have heard us singing.
House of the Long Shadows. The murderously funny mystery with a twist.
Oh, yes, I see what you mean.
House of the Long Shadows. Vincent Price, that's me. Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing, John Carradine, and Desi Arnaz. In a Golan Globus production of a Pete Walker film. House of the Long Shadows. From Canon Releasing.
All right, guys, we're here for a very special episode, the first of 1983, the first 1983 horror film I'm watching, and I have two very special guests here. First up, I have Troy Howarth, who's done numerous commentaries. I know he's a big fan of a lot of these actors, and he's written several books. How's it going, Troy?
Very good. Nice to be here to talk about a movie starring, my three favorite actors.
There we go. And we also have Nathaniel Thompson from Mondo Digital, done numerous commentaries as well.
Yes, indeed. And fun film. I don't know any of these actors. I don't know what they've done, but I'm sure. Actually, I just want to know, Troy, which of the four main actors is not among your favorites? Do you really dislike Peter Cushing that much?
Oh, Christopher Lee, of course, is not anywhere close. No, Mr. Carradine is not in my top tier, but I do like him just the same.
I can't believe one of us didn't start this out with "I have returned."
Please do not interrupt me whilst I soliloquize.
All right, this is kind of an oddball movie. Definitely made past its time. It stars four legends of the horror world, and it's a canon movie, which is even more bizarre. And the story is pretty funny. Pete Walker pretty much directed all his movies for himself. He produced all of them. He owned the rights to all of them. So this is the odd one out that he doesn't own. And he was going for a company, shop it around a script, went to Canon. They didn't like his film about the aborted fetus coming back for revenge, is kind of what I got the gist of it. So they wanted to do a classic horror film with the likes of Bela Lugosi and Boris Karloff, not knowing they were dead. So they went ahead and they tried to get the rights to Old Dark House. That was unsuccessful. They got what was the keys of I'm not familiar with this story. I know it's been done.
Seven keys to Baldpate.
There we go. And they kind of went with that, although it's not necessarily follows that book. So I'm sure you guys can go a little bit more in depth than that on this one.
It does not.
Sure. I mean, and no, it doesn't. And it's important to understand it was first of all, it was a book, and then it was adapted into a play the same year, 1913. So it's an oldie. It was written by Earl Durr Biggers, who's the guy who created Charlie Chan. So when it came out, George M. Cohan, the very same George M. Cohan that's played by Jimmy Cagney in Yankee Doodle Dandy, puts on a stage play which was very successful on Broadway. It ran for over 300 performances, and it's one of the kind of archetypal old dark house comedy murder mystery type things. Predates by several years things like The Bat and The Cat and the Canary. And it had a lot of life. I mean, it didn't get revived as much as those plays in the theatrical context, but it was adapted to TV, it was adapted to radio, and 6 features were made of it prior to this adaptation in 1982, which, as you say, was perhaps a little bit out of step with the times.
So when they got these actors together, they talk a little bit about calling them and getting them there. They got Lee to sign on first, or was it Price? I think it was Price to sign on first, and then after that, the dominoes kind of fell in a row here. It's kind of interesting that, of course, Cushing and Lee had been in how many movies together? 24? This was their 24th movie together or something along those lines?
No, 20. I think this was the 20. Let me double check. 22nd and final one to co-star Lee and Cushing. Now, it has to be emphasized, there are movies like Moulin Rouge and Hamlet that were done before the horror days where, they have nothing to do with each other. And there's a couple of things. Different websites will insist that Lee is somehow involved in certain films that he's not, or that Cushing's involved in certain films that he's not. So it's 22. And I think it was that they signed Vincent Price and Peter Cushing first, because I think Lee took a little bit more persuading. And he had some concerns, potential misgivings, because Cushing had been going through a really, really bad, basically decades since his wife had passed away, had a basically complete nervous breakdown and was in grips of terrible depression for a long time. And he was concerned, is he still capable of doing this, and also Vincent Price at that time was starting to have some issues. So, Lee later said that between John Carradine's hands, Vincent Price's legs, and Peter Cushing's mind, we all had problems during that period of time. And Lee was actually moving towards a heart surgery, which would result in his living for an additional 30 years, which I think I'm very grateful for.
And his career would turn out very differently had he not. So.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. He had his second or third life, if you will, at the end of his career, which kind of pushed him. I know that it's kind of unfair when we compare them all, because Lee had that big, that brilliant third part of his life, which is some of his best movies and performances, where he got to work like Martin Scorsese and all that stuff in the Lord of the Rings films. But, I love all these guys. Carradine I do love to a lesser extent, and his 80s run is a bit bizarre. He'll do one really good performance and then one really terrible film. You'll watch The Nesting, you're like, that was okay. Then you'll watch Frankenstein Island and be like, oh my God. And then you'll watch The Scarecrow, and he's great in The Scarecrow, but the Boogeyman's is nonsense. And then and The Howling he's fantastic in too. I'm not sure if you just kind of had to use John Carradine properly in his old age, to get such a great performance.
Yeah. Well, yeah, The Howling I think is probably my favorite of those. He's really great. He has a tiny bit of screen time, but he's so good in it. But yeah, I think you kind of had to have a certain amount of reverence and know his work to kind of know what to get out of him, whereas some people just kind of plugged him in because he was a name, and he just looked a little bit at sea.
He also had some major problems with arthritis, which you can see when you watch the film. I mean, you get some looks at his hands. I mean, it's awful. He was, it almost turned him into a little bit of almost like a living gargoyle, very, very strange kind of screen presence.
So the plot is basically a young writer has an argument with his agent, and he says he could write a book in this style in 24 hours for $20,000 bets. Which isn't complete nonsense anyways, but unless you're maybe Stephen King or somebody like that spitting them out. So he goes to this mansion, and he has a bunch of distractions. It's a classic kind of take on the old haunted mansion kind of storyline here. Comedy of errors ensue, and people keep showing up, more ridiculous after the next, and they kind of pay homage to a lot of the old dark house kind of themes and stuff like that. That's basically the plot of it. And it's a nostalgia piece. According to Pete Walker, I would agree. You have the classic stars playing into their kind of power and making jokes of it all, while we have the new young guy making kind of snarky comments. And when I first saw this movie, I saw this a long time ago, it was really distracting. I mean, it was very hard. I kind of just had a prejudice against the younger actors compared to the other ones, but watching it again, I kind of just warmed up to it, and I said, I don't know how else you would do this. I really don't know how else you would handle bringing that into the modern world. So I don't know. I know I certainly couldn't write anything better than that.
Well, I kind of don't really buy Desi Arnaz as a writer capable of turning out a classic novel in 24 hours, but once you get past that, I could think of some other casting choices that might have worked better, but you just kind of roll with it. It's part of the movie's charm, I guess. But everybody else makes up for it, and if you're a Walker fan, having Sheila Keith thrown in the mix compensates, I think, as well.
Oh yeah, I was going to say we're talking about 4 horror greats. There's 5 really. Sheila Keith, who substituted for Elsa Lanchester, who was supposed to do it, and frankly, I'm glad that it worked out the way that it did. I think although Elsa Lanchester was a marvelous actress and of course iconic for Bride of Frankenstein, she had a tendency to sort of lay on the Dottie a little bit thick, and I could see that performance not really quite working. Whereas Sheila Keith brings this wonderful kind of stone-faced gravitas to it, which works really well. And of course, if you're familiar with her work with Pete Walker, this was, it was Pete Walker's last film, so not surprisingly, this last movie they did together. But all 5 of those performances are just great little showcases. But especially, I think Frightmare, where she's genuinely frightening. So having her in the mix as well is great. I do agree. Desi Arnaz was it was a choice. It was a strange choice. I don't. In a way, I feel bad saying I don't buy him as a writer because anybody can be a writer, right? But somehow, I just don't. I don't buy it. But he's okay. I don't think he's ruinous.
Yeah.
The Sheila Keith performance I really liked because Pete Walker was a blind spot. I bought his movies like 3 or 4 times, and I had never watched them. And I said, you know what? I'm going to do 83. I'm doing House of Long Shadows. I like that film. That's the only one I've seen. So I said, I'm going to watch all of them, all the horror films he did. And I really enjoyed them. And I think that my favorite was probably The Confessional. And I think that Sheila Keith has that big exposition. Mostly you'd say exposition dump, which is a no-no. And the people would say, don't do that. But the acting was so good and the pathos. And I was like, she kind of does a little something like this, kind of like a take on that in here too, where she has that big kind of dump where she, but I thought it was just a brilliant bit of acting from her. And, I grew to really like her performances, and she's definitely one of the strong points of those movies, if not the main strong point. And especially The Confessional has the male lead too. He's also in the Flesh and Blood show, which he has a very similar speech in that film to the one that they have when Vincent Price walks in. It kind of reminds me of that when he's like, extra mink. You know what I mean? It's kind of back and forth that.
Well, funnily enough, Peter Cushing had been offered that part and apparently turned it down. I don't know. He later told Walker that he just was busy, but a lot of people assumed because of Cushing's kind of religious fervor after the death of his wife, maybe he was offended by the idea of playing a killer priest, but I don't know about that.
Didn't want a repeat of corruption.
Going back to the Sheila Keith thing for a second, I think if you look at a movie like Arnold, that gives you a good idea of how Elsa Lanchester would have tackled the part. That's pretty close, I think. So she probably would have been like, "Whoa, look what's going on," So I think it all got the best. I think Sheila Keith is just great in this, but I love her in anything. Like anything that has her name Walker's on it, you're guaranteed a good time.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you guys want to tackle the writer here is Michael Armstrong, who I knew from Mark of the Devil, which I think is a great movie. I've always loved that film. And he wrote some other things too. He actually directed under a pseudonym Screen Time, which is a ridiculous anthology, also from 1983, which I'm sure I'll be rewatching soon. But he's a pretty interesting guy. I wrote a pretty good script, honestly.
Very unlucky career. He started off at the same time as like Michael Reeves, and he was one of those young directors that was kind of seen as maybe the fresh new blood of British horror during the late 60s when things were starting to change. And he made a very interesting movie called, what was originally supposed to be called The Dark, but they changed it to The Haunted House of Horror. And they released it over here in the U.S. as Horror House. And there's a lot of good stuff in it, but unfortunately it was heavily tampered with and ended up being kind of a mess. Although I think a very interesting one. And then he did Mark of the Devil, which again, very unhappy experience because Adrian Hoven, the producer, ended up taking over the movie after a certain point and supervising the post-production. But I like Mark of the Devil a lot. I think it holds up pretty well, and I think it's a very interesting film. But really, very luckless with his directing career, and mostly just ended up working as a screenwriter. And yeah, he and Pete Walker had written this script about the the vengeance-minded fetus, which obviously was not written for our stars of this film. It was a project they had been working on and had abandoned, and Walker took it to Cannon whenever they were like, do you have anything? He said, yeah. But they were like, oh, this is not a horror film. This is not horror. We want to put a Scott off, So yeah, that's how this very old-fashioned, quaint movie came to be.
And Pete Walker, of course, famously, a lot of his films deal with social issues. Him tackling a movie about abortion, I think, would have been fascinating, even though it didn't have David McGillivray, who some of his best films were, had script by McGillivray. So, but him doing an abortion movie would have been interesting. I'm sure it would have been very different from The Suckling, if you've seen that. That's
Hopefully it would be.
Yeah.
Even though I love little creature movies, everyone praised The Suckling. When I finally watched it, I was like, I don't know. It wasn't one for me. I don't think it's horrible, but it was okay. It's kind of weird, though. It always was a good mixture. Like, it seemed like the writer, McGillivray, was kind of more like a liberal guy, and Pete Walker was on the more conservative side. So I was like, him writing the story about the aborted fetus coming back and killing people, it would have been more serious. I think it would actually have been pretty twisted, to be honest. I kind of like it. That would have been a cool movie. Reminds me of that Red Christmas film. Did you guys ever see that one? The
Unfortunately, yes. Yeah.
I like the movie only because it's so demented.
It's demented, but yeah, like to the point that because the power orb gets shut out to the house like halfway through, and they're still turning on the lights and all the appliances and all that. I'm just like, this is just too stupid. Like,
I don't recall that, but next time
you can't even get the basics of electricity right. Like, forget it. Like, there's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Also, an Australian movie during Christmas, it kind of loses. You know what I mean? Like the Silent Night remake, where it was in like California. You're like, there's no fucking snow. Like,
yeah. But the whole thing with Walker is really strange because you would look at his film. It's kind of like Paul Morrissey, you would look at his films and assume that this was a kind of left-leaning guy, but no, not at all. Walker was actually quite well, I'm talking past tense, he's still alive, quite conservative. And, funnily enough, his movies got into a lot of censorship problems, and people would ask him, does that bother you? Do you have an issue with censorship? He said, oh, no, I think it's great. I think it's exactly as it should be, and we need this kind of control and blah, blah, blah. So he was very cynical about doing horror films. They weren't the types of things he really wanted to do. It was business. He went from sexploitation to horror films in the same way that Norman J. Warren did. The difference being that Warren was a big fan. But interestingly, this just goes to show it doesn't necessarily matter if you like horror movies or not to make a good one. I think Walker's movies tend to be a lot better than Warren's. Certainly, they tend to be more coherent. Although I do tend to find most of his movies to be a good maybe 10 minutes over long.
For sure.
Although that seems to be a trend in British horror movies in general in the 70s. There are a lot of them where it's like, even especially Norman J. Warren, they're like cutting a good 10, 15 minutes out would have made a big difference.
Yeah, I agree.
I would actually compare him, and this is not an insult to Pete Walker because I think he's a much better filmmaker, but just his attitude, although he was a bigger fan of movies than Herschel Gordon Lewis, but he was definitely in it to make money, although Walker actually, he had his own movie theater chain, like an independent chain, so he loved movies, and he was well-educated in films. I don't know how well-educated Herschel Gordon Lewis was in the films and stuff like that. I mean, but he was definitely sexploitation, then horror films. He was in it to make, he knew where the money was. Although his movies were much cheaper and less professional than Walker. Walker's films always looked good and sounded good, and they were professional. But he did always have trouble, I think, casting his lead males. Were never as appealing. Kind of like the early Cronenberg movies, right? Where the lead male kind of is just like a stick in the mud at his early stuff.
Well, better than H.G. Lewis's, though.
Yeah, that's true.
Come on, that's not even comparable.
That's true. Now a lot of the male leads in his films they kind of disappear into the scenery, but maybe that's a good thing. I don't know. I mean, but the more interesting characters frequently are the villainous characters. So you have like Anthony Sharp in The Confessional as the killer priest, or Rupert Davies and Sheila Keith as the nice old cannibal couple in Frightmare. These are the really interesting characters, whereas the other guys, They have the dull parts, and that's the thing with Desi Arnaz in this film too. Is it's like we're there to see these icons. Why are we spending so much time with Desi Arnaz Jr.? But ultimately, it's something you have to make peace with, I guess.
Well, there was also it's kind of around this time. This was sort of the last wave of like the classic horror nostalgia, because obviously Lugosi and Karloff were long gone, Channing Jr. was long gone, but all of a sudden you had things like Ghost Story and Blood Bath House of Death, and you had this film where there's sort of getting the group back together again for the last time, but they couldn't quite figure out how to do it for a modern audience. Like Ghost Story especially is really frustrating because you have this amazing cast, but then like you have Craig Wasson who's just like skim milk in the movie, and they couldn't quite figure out, couldn't crack the book. So it's just you're kind of like just fighting the movie all the way through, even though it has some positive things in it. Bloodbath House of Death is like a TV sitcom, approach to it. Vincent Price is so much fun in it, but yeah, I think of those, this one probably gets the closest. But yeah, it's like none of these movies quite knew how to land, stick the landing with that cast.
I agree, and the thing about Ghost Story as well is, that's a great cast, but they're not horror icons. Even though Melvin Douglas had done a couple of horror films in his career, and I don't think any of the others really had. Maybe John Houseman.
Houseman did The Fog, so yeah.
Yeah, John Houseman with The Fog.
All his horror movies were like in a row in the 80s. He did the Murder by Phone in 82 too. So
Murder by Phone. Yeah. So they weren't really horror icons, but I mean it was definitely a very prestigious cast. You also had like Patricia Neal in there as well, and it's a really, really strong cast, really beautiful looking movie with a fantastic score by Philippe Sard, but it doesn't quite work. I think House of the Long Shadows, for all its faults, as we'll discuss, I think it ultimately works as an entertainment, even if it perhaps falls short of what it might have been.
Well, it just wants to be fun. I mean, it's not being pretentious about it. It's it's just a spooky little old house movie. Which again, did anybody actually want that in '83?
No,
I don't know. I was very confused. Again, I have a few more years on you guys, I guess. So I was kind of confused when this movie was announced because this came out at the juncture where Famous Monsters was still popular. It was in all the supermarkets, but Fangoria was big as well. Like it was on the way up. But like they were kind of at the same time they were coming out. And Famous Monsters was just banging the drum for this movie like crazy. I mean, there's multiple issues. They were like making such a big deal. This and like the Monster Club, these movies, they were like, oh, this is gonna be great. This is for all you monster kids, da da. And then they just never showed up. I mean, House of the Long Shadows barely played anywhere. I mean, it technically got released, but just barely. But like, unless you lived in LA or New York, you're kind of out of luck. And so I was like, where'd it go? Like, and then years later, it shows up on one of those big box MGM tapes finally. But I was like, what happened? Monster Club, same thing. It's like, where'd they go? What happened? Like, the audience just wasn't there for them.
If that had come 5 years earlier, it would have been unthinkable for a movie starring Lee, Cushing, and Price to not play wide. It would have definitely had a major release. Whereas, Walker said that because the movie was relatively cheap to make, it did end up being profitable. I'm sure that they made their money back. He said they made their money back with cable and video sales. So that makes sense. But I had no knowledge of this film whatsoever. And the very first time I ran into any kind of information about it, I remember I was on vacation in Florida with my family. We were down to Disney World. This would have been 1986. And at one point we're in a hotel room and I'm looking through the TV guide and I see a listing for this movie starring Vincent Price, Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing, and John Carradine. I'm like, what is this sorcery? This is impossible. There's no way such a film exists. And it wasn't coming on until like the day after we left, and I tried to get my dad to extend our trip so that I could watch the movie. I was a very spoiled child, but he would not do that, understandably so. So I finally saw it on, I think the first time it was on the USA Network, because they used to run it a lot on Saturday Nightmares, which you don't really have to cut much. There's very little objectionable material in the movie that you would have to cut. But it's just so weird because
bitch. That's what I was thinking too. Right.
Well, that's a great moment in and of itself. But it's so out of step with the times, perversely so.
Congratulations, Bernard. What a fall. All the way down the stairs. Wonderful. But then you always were good at falling from a great height.
Can't compare, my dear Geoffrey, with your famous death scenes, which you have played so brilliantly and for so many years, bitch.
I wish you would like let out your inner Veruca Salt, and maybe you could have extended your trip, and you could have seen it. But I'm
going to hold my breath. Yeah, please, let's spend several $100s more so we can reschedule our flight and extend our hotel stay. No, it wasn't meant to be. But I had no idea. I mean, I had not heard anything about it. I was just a little kid, of course, but the year it came out, 1983, I was only 6. So, obviously I wasn't aware, but you look back on how this movie was handled and it's like, it just barely made its way into the theaters.
Mm-hmm. I had a similar thing with Death Ship. I saw that cover when we were in Columbus visiting my family and I was like, what is this movie, Death Ship? Because the cover's so cool. And I was like, I was only like 12 or something. I was like, ask them if we can buy it. Because sometimes they'd sell you the tapes and they would not sell me Death Ship. For the life, it took years for me to see Death Ship. And it was just okay. Like, it was fine. Like, after I eventually saw it, it's fine.
It's funny you mentioned that, because I remember when I was a little kid, that was what, 1980, I think. And, but I was really tiny little kid, but I went to go see some movie. It was probably like, I don't know, Chomps or something. Some kid movie, some matinee, but they showed the trailer for Death Ship, which is an incredible trailer. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it is like one of the scariest trailers of that year. The movie doesn't come close, but the trailer was great. They showed the trailer for that and Matilda, the Elliot Gould kangaroo movie, back to back. It was like, I felt like I'd just been dosed with acid as a kid. I was just like, what's happening? Where do I see these movies? How do these exist? You know, but like, I always put those movies together in my head now.
So I guess we get to the plot. So the first one, when they enter the house, Desi Arnaz comes, and there's a couple there already. Sheila Keith and John Carradine are both there as the caretakers of the house, and they give him the 10th degree. John Carradine apparently is the patriarch of the family, although he was only 5 years or something along the lines older than Vincent Price. So he kind of plays into his character a bit. And I thought he did pretty well for his age. You know what I mean? They gave him a lot of dialogue, although they did say he did fall asleep sometimes while on the set.
To look at him, you believe that he could be the father because he looks a lot older than his years. He was 76. So by no means ancient, but he looked it. I mean, you could almost buy it. Of course, the whole twist at the end and everything is like, okay, that makes up for everything. But when you look at these guys, the cumulative age was over 200, but John Carradine was certainly the oldest, and he looked significantly older than his years. Like I said, 76 at the time. Vincent Price 71, Peter Cushing 69, and Lee was 60. So I guess theoretically, he would have been a very young father to Christopher Lee is just barely plausible, but the others perhaps not so much.
But honestly, if they had said that he was Christopher Lee's grandfather, I probably would have bought it.
That's true.
I mean, Vincent Price is looking pretty rough in this one too, and like especially in HD. I think I probably saw this on DVD originally. So like when you see the Blu-ray, you're like, oh wow, he does look a little significantly older than you remember him, and everything. So, what is up with the? I know that they were reading things and hearing things that Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee, when they were together alone, they used to like to do the Looney Tunes cartoon voices. And so I don't know if Peter Cushing's idea was to kind of do a slight Sylvester accent. He wanted this accent is so silly.
I've often wondered if that was in the script or if that was a little kind of flourish that he added. Cushing had a very strange attitude about accent work, which is why very often his accent performances are not among his better ones, like in Shockwaves, where he does this now it's here, now it isn't German accent. He would say, yeah, just so you remind them every now and again. No, I don't really buy that. I think it needs to be more consistent. So he does the speech impediment thing, but he's also playing I think of the four, he's the one who is really stretching the most outside of his comfort zone because he's doing that unusual sort of speech impediment, but he's also playing a very cowardly figure, which is not typical of Cushing in films. And he also even gets to do a drunk scene, which is pretty rare. Maybe one or two other films I could think of where he gets a little tipsy. So he's definitely a lot of fun. It reminds me more of Elmer Fudd, honestly. The R's are coming out as W, so Victoria, it's an interesting choice, and I've always wondered if that was in the script or if he just thought, wouldn't it be nice to do this? And maybe that was it. I don't know.
I don't think anybody's going to argue with him.
Accents.
Oh, go ahead.
Christopher Lee being a maestro of accents, I wonder how he felt about having to listen to some of those with Cushing.
I mean,
honestly, Pleasance is iffy too sometimes. Like, he has to do a different voice in every movie, and sometimes you're like, what accent is that? But I love it anyways. Like, I would never be able to be like, that doesn't sound... I know people particularly pick on his Scotsman accent in Phenomenon, but...
I have been told by Scots people that his accent is perfectly fine in that and in Burke and Hare when he played with George Rose and Peter Cushing in Flesh and the Fiend. So that's what I was told. But
Flesh and the Fiend, I think sounds good. But I did have my friend Duncan McLeish, who's on here sometimes, was not a fan of he's from Scotland. He was not a fan of the Phenomenon accent. But I'm not going to argue it. I like it anyways. I like the performance. It's not going to stop me. Off accent's not going to ruin a performance for me. You know what I mean?
I think it's because you're more used to the sound of his voice, so it sounds weird. Like I hear British people say Renee Zellweger's accent and Bridget Jones is perfect. I'm like, it just sounds grotesque to me, just because I know her voice, or like Robert Downey Jr. and Sherlock. It's like no matter how good your accent is, it doesn't work to me. Like I know your voice, and Donald Pleasant's doing it. I love Phenomena, but yeah, it's a little weird hearing him do it.
Yeah. But Cushing has that brilliant speech right before he's killed in the film when he's like, I've been always afraid. And you like see a lot of pathos in there. He does a really good job. And you kind of buy that, especially with all his past with his wife and everything like that. So his wife died in the early 70s, right? I know that she had died right around Horror Express time, right?
1971, the very beginning of 1971, he was signed to do Blood from the Mummy's Tomb for Hammer, and he was also to do The Abominable Dr. Phibes with Vincent Price. Then she had been in ill health for many years, and when she died, he bailed out of that. And I forget I think the very first thing he did afterwards was Twins of Evil, where he gives one of his most frightening and intense performances. And the difference in Cushing from I can't remember which one specifically was done right before it. It may have been The House of Drip Blood. You look at him in that film, and then you see him in Twins of Evil, and it's like he's aged 20 years.
And I think his role in Vampire Lovers had to be cut short too due to his wife's illness, right? No?
I don't think so.
His role's really particularly short in that. It's only like the first act, isn't it?
First and last, so he's kind of got like the Christopher Lee type role that time.
But I mean, I love Cushing, but I do think that Lee and Price outshine him in this one. I do, for this one, particularly in performance. I do, but they get more to do, I think.
I don't know. I when I first saw this movie, my favorite was Vincent Price. Like I grew up watching him the most, so I was a big Vincent Price fan. So I was kind of skewed a bit. So every time I go back to it, I kind of like prefer a different person. I think it kind of rotates around a little bit. But like you, I think Carradine's probably my least favorite because he doesn't have as much like emotional sort of attachment to me. But yeah, I don't know. I'm not even sure who I would say my favorite is. But yeah, I know the very first time I saw it was definitely Vincent Price. But I don't know. I kind of I waffle back and forth a bit with this one.
I think it's almost like a Rorschach test for horror fans, of a certain type of horror film. If you really like that period of, the AIP Edgar Allan Poe films and the Hammer films and all of that, probably it makes sense you would gravitate more towards the actor you prefer. Christopher Lee is my favorite actor. Not surprisingly, I think he gives the best performance, especially at the end. That scene where the mask finally comes off and you see what it's all about. He's moving, but he's also scary there. He's the only one watching this movie that I could see working in a contemporary horror context in a way that, Vincent Price in the 1980s was just a walking anachronism. But I love them all. I mean, I'm not taking anything away from Cushing, who I think probably does give the most atypical performance of the three. Whereas Vincent Price is in full-blown, hammy, theatrical mode, which we love so much. And Lee is doing his usual kind of straight man. So he's the straightest performance in the film. He's the most serious. But you need that because with Price up here and Lee kind of balances things out a little bit. And Lee also is, in general, I think has tended to be rather an underrated actor for many years. But he was really good at playing comedy, which he didn't always get credit for. And one of the funniest scenes in the film, I think, is when Sheila Keith is singing, and the cutaways to the different actors reacting. And Lee's close-ups are just hysterical. He's just looking at his watch and just this pained expression on his face.
Sitting on the love seat.
Very funny. Yeah, it's a great moment.
Well, then Vincent Price has that really great line at the end when she gets strangled by the piano wire, and he's like, well, they must have heard her singing. Everyone's just like, I guess there was a bunch cut out from this movie. So I guess they had to cut a lot of it out. Now, unfortunately, I wish that stuff was saved because it would be a goldmine. Behind the scenes, deleted scenes with these guys, or just interactions with them talking would have been brilliant. But and then people, I guess, didn't really think like that,
No. Vincent Price apparently didn't like Pete Walker very much. He gave an interview at one point. I can't remember exactly where I read it, but he was very critical of the film. He was very disappointed with how it turned out, and he said it was all. I think he said something along the lines, "It's all down to that stupid director." So obviously he wasn't particularly enamored with Pete Walker, and Lee did indicate that there was a lot of comedy stuff that got got cut in favor of the spooky stuff. But the movie's still very funny as it is. So I'd like to see that material, but I very much doubt it still exists.
Yeah, Canon was not good at keeping edited material at all. I had to work on a few. Yeah, and like trying to get some of these deleted scenes is impossible. Like unless MGM somehow got it in their hands immediately from the vaults. Yeah, most lying around. I mean, really, it's a pretty long movie as it is, though. Like, I mean, I'd like to see the material, but I definitely would not want to see it cut back in, though, because it's already a little got some pacey issues anyway.
Right in the middle, especially when you introduce the other young couple that comes in, it kind of turns into a big long digression. But like I said, that's a problem I have with Walker in general. The movies tend to be a little flabby. But this one definitely, it's about an hour and 45 minutes. So I don't know, maybe if there were a way to cut out some scenes I'm not that nuts about and put some good stuff back in, that would be nice, but that's not going to happen.
Norman Rossington's in this, and he was an actor that I wasn't super familiar with, but I was. You know what I mean? Like, he was so like, I was like, oh, the station master's great, and I looked him up and I was like, oh, he's the other sergeant in Deathline, and I'd seen Deathline 3 or 4 times, so I was like, he's a very good actor, and he's kind of a chameleon, but he was one of the better parts. I would like to see more of him. You know what I mean? He was very good in the early kind of role there. Again, bouncing off Desi Arnaz, but he had a lot of funny lines. So he's pretty good.
I love hearing him say bald Peter.
Yeah. And then who's the other actor in here from the Secret of Dorian Gray, the Massimo, Richard Todd is his name?
Richard Todd.
That's the one I knew him from, because I'm a weirdo and I love that version of Dorian Gray, the perverted one with Herbert Lom. I love that movie, Hellmont Burger. But yeah, it's a very good one, and he's good in that too, and he's pretty solid in this one. I think that we should probably talk about the double twist in here, which I know a lot of people. It is what it is. The first time I saw it, I must admit I was like, I hate it. I hated that double twist. And I don't know if I'm just don't care about those kind of things. I just enjoy the ride. But the double twist is a bit of an odd choice.
Yeah, and that's definitely not in the source material. If you watch, if you're interested in Sympathies to Baldpate, there's actually a Warner Archive like a double DVD that has multiple versions of the movies on there, so you can sort of see how it evolved over the years. But they more or less stick to the gist of the plot, whereas this one just completely veers off at the end. It goes all super twisty and meta. It kind of does an April Fool's Day sort of thing, but then it does the whole, like, is it real or not thing on top of it. It's probably one twist too many, but, again, I think we're all kind of used to it at this point.
Yeah, it's kind of like that London After Midnight, Mark of the Vampire thing, where, the whole way through you're led to believe that it's one thing, and then it turns out to be something completely different. But it doesn't bother me in Mark of the Vampire, quite frankly. I'm not one of those people that thinks the movie's ruined by the twist. I find it a delightful film. And in this case, I agree, there's one twist too many. It would have been better if they would have kind of simplified that a little bit. But, if nothing else, when the charade is revealed for what it is, it does give us an opportunity to hear Vincent Price call Christopher Lee a bitch.
Improv line there. See, I would have loved to see a whole movie of that. Them playing into each other, like more like it has a little bit of like meta quality, but if the whole entire movie was meta, just kind of like underlining like a little bit of a like passive aggressiveness towards each other, would have been quite funny.
Yeah, they were friends. I mean, all four of them had, in some configuration or other, worked together before. Lee and John Carradine had just done a really good made-for-TV movie called Goliath Awaits back in 1981. Cushing and Carradine had done Shockwaves back in 1977. And Price and Carradine, I'm sure there were multiple examples even going back to the 40s, but certainly Monster Club back in 1980, which Christopher Lee turned down as soon as he heard the title. He said, nope, I'm doing that one.
I'm not going to be in a monster.
I mean, he had his quirks, definitely, but in terms of where he was at with his career at this time, really where everybody was at with their career at this time, you see Vincent Price in the 80s pretty much being reduced mostly to cameos. This is one of the very few movies in the 1980s where he has a substantial role. Peter Cushing is only a few years away from enforced retirement because of his health, but most of the stuff after Star Wars, you would think Star Wars would have done something for him. It did absolutely nothing for him, and I think a lot of it was down to the fact that he had been very, very open about his problems after his wife's death. He had made it very clear that he was suicidal. He had made it very clear that he had some mental health issues, and I think a lot of people just didn't want to hire him. I think they were concerned he would be a possible liability. So he really wasn't getting many good roles around this time. He does another canon film called Sword of the Valiant, which is one of the worst films he ever participated in. It's awful. It's probably one of the 2 or 3 worst films that Sean Connery ever did too. Quite a terrible film. Huh?
I don't know. Sean made an awful lot of stinkers. I don't know.
Oh, he did, but I mean, they don't get much worse than that one.
That ain't a stinker.
No.
Zardoz is awesome.
I like Zardoz. I won't hear a word against it.
But Lee was Avengers and League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. Oh, there's a bunch of them. Oh boy.
there are some bad ones. Medicine Man was a bad one too. But anyway, it's a bad film. Regardless of where it ranks on the stinkometer, it's a bad film. And Lee at this time was kind of in a weird transitionary phase. He'd gone out to Hollywood and was working in America, and it really didn't go as great as he was hoping it would, although it gave him some opportunities to do different things. But, he had a great kind of future in store for him, whereas for Carradine, this is one of the relatively few good films in the 1980s. Price, like I said, is kind of, he's not going to do too much after this. Cushing is almost done, so it really is kind of a last opportunity to see most of them kind of strutting their stuff.
Well, the weird thing with Price, though, is that he had a weird resurgence, though, because obviously the big thing was Thriller. Having him do the voice for Thriller, like all of a sudden he was the guy everybody knew Vincent Price, even little kids knew who Vincent Price was all of a sudden. And plus he'd done the Muppet Show. He kind of like went out way outside of his comfort zone, and I think it really helped him out. And of course, in Edward Scissorhands, at the very end of his career, that again, it's really huge. And Whales of August, I think, gave him a really nice sort of like closure as a dramatic actor. So, yeah, he didn't explode the way that Lee did, but he had a fascinating kind of little epilogue, I think, after this movie in a way.
He did, and also with the advertising, with all the commercials he did. I can still remember watching him hawking, I think it was a bug zapper. He's sitting on his deck with a bug zapper, and every time a bug is zapped, he's he was pretty shameless. Hangman, I think he did an ad for Hangman and all these Vincent Price's shrunken heads. All these different things. So he was all over the place. He was definitely the pop culture figure. But this plays into a point we haven't mentioned, I think is worth mentioning. We see something in the opening titles of this film that, as far as I know, and Nathaniel will correct me, I'm sure, if I'm wrong, but I think it started with The Towering Inferno, which is where you have 2 actors who are big names, and each one wants to have top billing. So they do Steve McQueen's at the left, Paul Newman's elevated. They do the same thing here. It's Vincent Price, but Christopher Lee's elevated. So depending on whether you're reading top to bottom or left to right, you've got top billing.
Yep. Yeah, I think that was the first one, as far as I recall. Yeah, that movie was a credits nightmare. So.
Sure.
And then it got really weird. I think Outrageous Fortune was the first one where they had to keep flipping them because Bette Midler and Shelley Long were like both like egomaniacs on that movie. So like if you looked at the newspapers versus the movie versus like they kept flipping it around and changing the positioning all over the place. It was really confusing. Mm-hmm. So
and that had even happened back in the 60s with The Gorgon, where Christopher Lee by that point was doing a lot of continental European films. So he was working a lot in Italy and France and Germany, for example. So for the continental market, he had top billing, whereas, in the British and American market, it was Cushing who was billed first. And for years and years, that was the way it was on video. But then they must have pulled credits from a continental European master, because now it's Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing in The Gorgon. So yeah, that's the weird contractual things that happen with billing are very strange.
That's one of my favorite Christopher Lee performances, because he plays kind of like swashbuckling heroic at the end. He's got the big mustache. He's fantastic in that movie. That was like one of the first times I was watching all the Hammer movies, going through them, and I'm like, oh, he's different in this one. He's got that life. And then when I watched The House that Dripped Blood, that was another one where I was like, oh, he's so terrified in this. And that's when I started actually putting Lee above the other ones. I just saw he was a little bit more versatile. And not that I don't love those two. I just felt like, to me, but it's kind of hard when Cushing does that, like Dr. Frankenstein, when he's really snappy and making fun of the other doctors. Stuff is so brilliant too. He's so witty.
He was a brilliant actor. So was Price, but they all had very different styles. I think Lee is perhaps arguably a slightly more modern actor. He was, after all, a film actor. He did very little in the way of theater, whereas Vincent Price obviously came from a background of theater, as did Cushing. And Cushing has a little bit of that kind of old school, kind of stiff upper lips chaps kind of thing about him, whereas Lee feels a little bit more kind of modern in a way. But the funny thing is that they all, because they did so many period pieces, it's really weird to see something like Night of the Big Heat where Christopher Lee is driving a car. It's just really strange to see things like that because we're so used to them stepping out of a horse-drawn carriage.
Mm-hmm. I think one contrast that I like is if you watch Horror Express, their acting styles in that one, it's very interesting because they're sort of at odds, between trying to snoop and see what he's trying to smuggle through on the train, all this the banter, but like one is very prim and proper old school, the other one's like being sort of very sneaky and shady, and it's interesting. Yeah, one's definitely more modern than the other one, acting wise in that movie in particular.
Yeah, and that's a great example of Lee really playing with his screen image of kind of frosty, aloof, a little bit pompous and imperious. But then as the movie goes along, he realizes, oh my God, I've been an asshole, and he starts to get nice, and he turns into a real swashbuckling hero at the end of the film. So it's one of my favorite performances, and it's funny to me that of all the films they did together, they had to go to Spain to make a movie where they really got an opportunity to really bounce off each other because none of the other films really gave them that chance.
Yeah, because you think you might be a villain like for the first half hour of the movie, and then it suddenly switches you because it's a neat.
You don't need a Lee villain when you got Telly Savalas in that movie. he's on hinge. It's like Maggot Part 2 in that movie. He's so weird. He like shows up and he's all like drunk and overdriven. He's great in that too. I love that movie.
Oh, I love
it's
it.
a great movie.
Oh, I do too.
It's a fantastic movie.
I can watch that movie every year.
What are you guys' favorite performances by these guys? I'm just curious. I mean, there's so many from all their different roles.
Oof.
I'll let Nathaniel go first.
Oh my God, oh my God. Wow. Christopher Lee, probably Horror Express, like I said. Again, it was also one of the first that I saw that wasn't a Hammer film, and it really jumped out at me. So it's kind of been a favorite ever since then. Cushing, probably Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed. Carradine is tricky. I don't know. I mean, again, I might have to go with The Howling because, again, it's one of the first ones I saw him in, and I think he's a delight in it, even though it's not the greatest showcase. And then Price, maybe The Tingler, but if you ask me in 30 minutes, it could be something else. There's so many with him.
It's worth noting that, little film geek thing here. I think John Carradine is the only actor in The Howling who is playing a character named after a director he worked with. He plays Earl Kenton, who directed him in House of Dracula and House of Frankenstein. So there you go. My favorite John Carradine performance is probably Grapes of Wrath.
And Bluebeard.
Bluebeard, I love him in Stagecoach too. He's terrific in that. But I think it's easy to forget how good he could be because he turned into this, like I said, this almost caricaturish gnome-like figure later on with his booming Shakespearean voice and very theatrical delivery. But he could be great. So there are some performances there, but I think probably Grapes of Wrath is my favorite performance of his. Cushing, absolutely 100%. Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed. Absolutely brilliant performance from him there. Price, I kind of go back and forth between Mask of the Red Death and Witchfinder General. I'm not as keen on Witchfinder General as a lot of people seem to be, but his performance is outstanding. And Theater of Blood too. Theater of Blood's a big one. But then Lee, I'm gonna say for Lee, probably The Wicker Man. I think that was a great kind of showcase for him, and it's such a subtle and layered and interesting performance. There's so many little things you go back and watch that make you realize what a wonderful actor he could be. He could convey so much with just expression alone, without any lines. He had very expressive eyes.
Yeah, I would say my favorite Lee performance no one ever talks about though is from Captain Invincible. I think he's just spectacularly good in that.
Return Captain Invincible, and it's not a good film, but it's him and David Carradine and Stockard Channing, Safari 3000, which is not by any means a great film, but boy, is he fun in that. He spends most of the film with the Darth Vader helmet on.
I think one of his funniest moments he ever had was in the deleted scene of Gremlins 2. I wish they would have kept that scene in there. It's like, I heard they suck blood. It's like, that's not true at all. He's like, oh, he like backs off. It's so funny. It's so brilliant. And it's like, I know that he probably was like, don't make me do this to Joe Dante. He probably only did it for the apologizing for being in Howling 2, which is, Ooh, that movie's so funny, but not good. Not a good movie.
I enjoy it though. I enjoy it. I have the 4K. I'm not too proud to admit it. And my God, that man, he keeps such a straight face throughout that movie. It's just great. I remember watching that movie with my family when I was a kid. My brother and my older brother and my mom were watching it, and I was the only one who didn't understand that this movie was terrible because I was just a little kid. I remember one point they cut to Christopher Lee in the back of the car. Red Brown, I think, is driving the car, and Lee's just sitting there with his eyes closed. And my brother said, "Oh, he's probably thinking, how the hell do I get out of this thing?"
When they're driving and then all of a sudden there's a werewolf in the back of the car for no reason and no one noticed it in broad daylight. I'm like, what the hell is this thing, man? It's entertaining crap. That's a good bad movie. Move over, Troll 2. Howling 2 is better.
I'll tell you what, and it's the only movie you're going to see Christopher Lee in punk rock shades.
I'm not so sure I have that much more to say about the movie. I know that it just kind of, like I said, made its money back. Only for the cable, and it was PG, so they said they played it a lot on television, so they could get away with that. And it's definitely one of these movies where I don't think people realize how good they had it, that these guys were all in the same movie, because they never really got to interact that much, even in some of their other movies. I know Cushing and Lee interacted a lot, but I mean, what did Price and Cushing had Madhouse, and that was, I think, the one they interacted the most in.
They had Madhouse. They have a really good scene at the end of that film, which just about makes it worthwhile. It's not much of a film, in my opinion. Cushing is completely squandered in a completely gratuitous cameo in Dr. Phibes Rises Again. I don't understand why they cast him in that part. There were other parts. Maybe he just wasn't available for more than a day, because he shot that in the morning. There's no way he was there for more than a couple of hours. But the three of them had first been together in Scream and Scream Again, which is a movie I love dearly. They could have, it wasn't written as a star vehicle. That's the difference between this and House of Long Shadows, is that was just written as a general purpose script. But there were roles in there that Lee and Cushing could have played that were bigger and better. But, that's just the way it worked out. I love that film anyway. But this is indeed the only opportunity. As I said before, Lee and Carradine had done Goliath Awaits. Cushing and Carradine had done Shockwaves. They didn't share any scenes together. So this is the only opportunity you can get them all together.
Yeah. It's kind of a shame, though. I mean, but this movie, I'm glad we have this movie. It's super interesting that they got to interact. It's way later than it should be. I feel like 1980 even would have been late enough. Like, that would have been the cutoff. I feel like but 1983 just shows how kind of out of touch. Not that I'm saying this, I'm upset this movie exists. This is out of touch canon was, right? With what the hell they were doing with their money. Like, they did not know what a horror movie was. They didn't make many horror movies, to be honest. They had was it Dr. Heckle? Mr. Hype was a canon, which is an odd movie. And then Schizoid was a canon, and there was another one in there. X-Ray was a canon,
there's X-Ray, there's New Year's Evil. Yeah, there's a few.
Yeah.
A bunch of Academy Award winners there. I think House of Long Shadows is technically the best of the bunch. Has to be by default of those ones.
I mean, you could consider 10 Till Midnight a horror film, I guess. It's certainly a good one. Yeah, that's a good. I like that movie a lot. But this is good. The main thing that people always knock it for is, why did you get these people together for such a creaky old property as this? They should have done a Gothic film, or they should have done this or done that. I think they did, a reasonable job with it. I think it's an entertaining film, maybe a little draggy in spots. It could benefit from some trimming. But the actors are not phoning it in. They're definitely engaged. Arnaz is not fantastic, but he's okay. Julie Peasgood, I don't know. I'm not entirely sure why they didn't put Louise English in that role. I think she would have been rather better, but that's just my opinion.
Unfortunate name too. I'm not trying to be a joke, but it's a very unfortunate name. I'd be very upset.
It is an unfortunate name, but it did not stop her from writing a very well-regarded book called The Greatest Sex Tips in the World.
I mean, she seems like a very nice person in the special features, but she doesn't get much to do, to be honest. It's not really. Sometimes people want to blame the actors, and they're like, what could I do with this? I did the best I could. That's all that's there. I mean, rarely is an actor ever going to shine in every performance they ever do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think if you want an idea where this might have gone with canon, I mean, look at where they did with something like Rockula. They could have stuck the guys in something like that, which
I've
But
not seen
approach to-
Rockula just yet.
Canon was a little, their attitude to horror was a little peculiar, but and it's worth mentioning that Pete Walker kind of, I can see why they would go for him, because at the time they were sort of going after these directors who were sort of past their prime. Obviously, the one they really jumped on was Michael Winner, who they really embraced openly. As far as British directors, and obviously in America it was J. Lee Thompson. They brought them in, but like Alan Birkinshaw, all these guys. So theoretically, it seems like Pete Walker would have fit like a glove, but not so much. But we had Pete Walker done more canon stuff. I would have been kind of curious to see where it would have gone, but that's all we got.
He pretty much, he said he was pretty much retired by the time he did this, because I think the last film he had done was Home Before Midnight, which also featured Richard Todd, who we mentioned, who is an actor I like very much, and he was great for Hitchcock in Stage Fright back in the 1950s. That's a movie that doesn't get enough talk about it, and he's really, really good in that. But he was one of those actors like Kenneth More and Trevor Howard in the 1950s that was really associated with like British war movies, and he was a big star over there. So having him here in this little kind of cameo role was a nice little callback to Walker's previous collaboration with him. But he knew that the industry was changing. Everything was sort of dying away. Hammer was effectively dead by then. Amicus was certainly dead by then. AIP, essentially was done. So his kind of filmmaking was over, and this was just kind of the only real time he did like a gun for hire kind of job. But I don't think that he does badly by it.
No, he does fine. Should also mention he has it's a small part, but he's also very effective in Asylum. He's in the very first story playing a murderer's husband.
Richard Todd, rest in pieces.
Yeah.
Yeah, he has the great line that would get him canceled now. He says, taking voodoo lessons from a black charlatan. He's so wonderfully despicable.
So the one thing is there a way that you could, like, if you could cast like somebody like besides Desi Arnaz in this, who do you guys think would be a good choice? I'm thinking Dave Naughton would be a good choice from American Werewolf in London. I think he has that energy, and I think he's a better actor, but
yeah.
Griffin Dunn?
Yeah.
Oh, even better, actually. I think he's a little bit better than Dave Naughton in that movie, but
yeah, he'd be great, actually.
Yeah, I could see that. I think put Griffin Dunn and have Louise and Louise English and Julie Peasgood swap roles, and we're good to go.
Or you could have got another one of the Hammer girls, that was in those movies. Would have been a little
Caroline Munro.
Yeah,
somebody like Caroline Munro would have been fine. Yeah, that would have been okay. It's okay. I mean, it is what it is. We must accept it for the way it is. But it is a cure. It's just one of those things. You see all these names listed, and it's Desi Arnaz. And it's like one of these is not like the other.
What if Joe Spinell had done the Desi part?
Joe Spinell.
His writer. Oh man, he would have been like the last horror film, but as a writer, bring his mom along for the ride.
Absolutely.
He's his
or maybe the guy from what's that movie called? The one with Louise Lasser.
From Blood Rage.
Blood Rage.
Yeah. So yeah, maybe Desi Arnaz is okay. We'll be fine with him.
Yeah, I would still like to see Joe Spinell in the role.
I would love to see. It would have been very different energy for the movie, to put it mildly.
Like, I want to do a Joe Spinell impression, but Desi Arnaz doesn't have any quotable lines in the movie to do it. You know what I mean? Like to do in Spinell's voice, but that'd been great. I think that he'd be the scariest part of the movie.
He would.
I think they would have got walked in the house and been like, "This ain't worth the gig."
He'd be the sweatiest part of the movie for sure, and. Arnaz does have one. I have a feeling there are a couple of lines here and there that I do think are pretty good that maybe he doesn't deliver for all they're worth. But he says at one point to Norman Rossington when he says the place is cursed, and he says, "Yes, I'm sure it's drenched in evil." It would have been better with a more flourish, but it's not a bad line.
Maybe even like a Bill Murray. You know what I mean? Like just somebody who has can command a scene. Over like that, but I don't know. The guys, it's a lot of big shoes to fill.
Mm-hmm.
If they were to redo something like this now, can you imagine 4 actors that have the stature that any of these guys have to fill in the booth? I can't imagine that. Like it'd be like people I know would be like, well, Bruce Campbell and Robert Englund. Bruce Campbell would be all right because he's got the charisma. but I not in the same league, I don't think.
Well, this was a period where, this is the last hurrah for kind of that school of horror stars, because 1980s is when the horror stars are turning into the directors. So it's like George Romero, John Carpenter, Dario Argento, Lucio Fulci, Sam Raimi, people like that, and the special effects people. So it's Tom Savini and Rick Baker and Rob Bottin. It's trended in a very different direction. And there were indeed actors afterwards. In some cases, maybe the term is somewhat loosely applied, but people like Kane Hodder and other guys who are associated with horror films. But Robert Englund definitely has that kind of theatrical background and training and could do something like this. I could see him doing the Peter Cushing part. Why not?
Kurt Russell.
Oh, Kurt Russell's great. And I was going to mention him earlier when we said that you kind of have the young actors kind of being with the old actors and they don't really work. He was one that worked. What was the one he did with Jimmy Stewart and Strother Martin? The Western kind of one. It's not exactly, it has George Kennedy in it, and he's like, Jimmy Stewart gets released from prison. He's got the fake eyeball. Man, what is that movie? It's really good. And Kurt Russell's
Did you
really
dream
young.
this movie?
No, I watched it. Somebody picked it for a Patreon pick, and I had never heard of it. And it's got Jimmy Stewart in it, and Strother Martin, and Kurt Russell, and George Kennedy, and there's more people too. It's really good. It's kind of like an old kind of criminal kind of story movie.
I'm not familiar. I'll have to look
Big
it up.
Lebowski plays the banker too. It's kind of like a old school, like it's got to be 30s Great Depression, 20s Great Depression kind of movie. I can't remember exactly, but yeah, it's a great one. And Kurt Russell, young in that, he's fantastic in it too.
Yeah, Fool's Parade. I've actually never seen that.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. I know Bruce likes it too. Bruce is a fan of it too. But yeah, that's the movie I thought of immediately. I was like, Kurt Russell had that transition. I know, like you hear the stories on set with him and Charles Bronson, stuff like that. So.
We had this kind of discussion before when Nathaniel and I did a commentary for another movie with Christopher Lee, an old Dark House movie called Dark Places, where you have all these wonderful actors, but the focus is on this a very capable, very good actor named Robert Hardy, but he doesn't have the kind of screen presence and charisma to hold your attention for a whole lot of wandering around an old dark house and staring off into the distance as he's having flashbacks. He's just not that kind of guy. So it's very important casting, to get the right actors. And some of the people we've mentioned, I could definitely see it working really well. But, by the same token, we could have gotten somebody far, far worse too. So Desi will suffice.
Could have got the guys from Craig, or the guys from Hysterical.
Craig Nelson.
Am I the only one that like the guys in Hysterical, the three brothers, they're terrible to me?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, they're everyone else around the movie. You got like Clint Walker and Murray Hamilton and Richard Kiel, and they're doing fantastic. And then you got these three guys that wrote it that put themselves to stars. Terrible.
Richard Kiel should have played the lead.
There you go.
Best-selling author Richard Kiel.
Put him in a wheelchair.
The poor cameraman who would have to do that to like make him like have eyeline. Their actors would have been impossible.
Already had Christopher Lee in there. He's quite tall.
Christopher Lee was 6'4". Vincent Price was 6'3". So they're both big, and Cushing was by no means a short man either. He was 6 foot tall, but because he's standing next to those guys, he looks kind of short.
I think Carradine's tall too. I think he's probably roughly 6 foot.
He probably was, but by this stage, he's
he's hunched over.
Not anymore.
He's just a gargoyle.
He's the incredible shrinking thespian.
Yeah. Where do you guys compare this? Another 1983 movies. I think it stands alone as kind of its oddball title, and I don't think 83 is quite as deep as 80 or 81 or 82 even when you look at the list of films.
Yeah, it's a weird year. That's kind of when the MPAA was really starting to really crack down on horror movies, kind of hard. Not as bad as it got, a little later, but yeah, they were really starting to get a little strict. So you start getting things like Amityville 3D, which was suddenly PG and really watered down, and it was kind of a transitional period. But I don't know what you would compare this to from that year. It was kind of all over the place.
I don't think you can. It's an anachronism. It's a deliberate anachronism. I mean, that was what Walker realized early on. They want an old school, old-fashioned, old dark house movie with the old horror stars, and he delivered that. That's exactly what he was asked to do, and he did it. No, there's nothing else quite like it. I mean, it's a movie I have great affection for. I can happily watch it every couple of years or so just to enjoy those five great kind of icons of the genre.
Agreed. Oh, another good role that would have been for Desi Arnaz's would have been Jonathan Price at this time. He would have killed it as well, I think.
Interesting idea.
Something Wicked This Way Comes. I thought he'd be good in it, but probably a little too old at that point. I don't know how old he was at that time.
No, he wasn't very old, but yeah. He has such a great thespian voice, though. It might have clashed with the other guys because like they would have been like an acting off. Like
he actually doesn't come across very modern, but he's just good. You know what I mean?
How about Michael Moriarty?
Can control him.
Yeah.
He'd send
if it
all
were
the
Michael
actors
Moriarty
away.
on Good Behavior.
God knows what accent you would have gotten out of him, but yeah.
He'd send all the actors away and say, "No, I don't want them to stand in. I want to do it by myself," because that's how they said he used to act. He'd send the actors away and read his lines by himself, which is insane.
Mm-hmm.
But honestly, if somebody keeps stepping over your lines all the time, then go. I'm better off without you. I appreciate you guys doing this. Is there anything else you guys want to say about House of Long Shadows?
Yeah, it's a fun one. It still kind of gets overlooked a lot, I think, even though we've had, there's a pretty good Blu-ray special edition of it. There's a DVD that has totally different special features, out there. So it's gotten some love, but yeah, it's weird. It still seems like kind of a footnote, which I guess is what it was always bound to be, which is fine. But yeah, I think if you like any of these actors, give it a look. I mean, it's a fun movie, and yeah, don't if I think if the ending kind of puts you off at first, just let it sit for a while, and you'll kind of get over it. I mean, it's there's certainly worse '80s twist endings out there than the one in this movie.
Yeah, I agree with that. And people say, oh, they should have done like a proper like Edgar Allan Poe Gothic. I mean, that mine had already been pretty well taken care of by then. So it's fine. It's fine. It's enjoyable. It's entertaining. That's all the more it's trying to be, and that's good enough.
I agree. I appreciate you guys doing this.
Thank you.
Any plugs?
Well, it should have been Troy didn't mention before, but we actually did a commentary for Haunted House of Horror. So if you want to check some more Michael Armstrong, we're on the '88 Blu-ray that came out, not the terrible Blu-ray before that, but the most recent one. We're on that one.
Yeah, they fixed the audio too, thank goodness. So that's a very nice addition. Yeah, I don't know what's announced at this point, so I hate to say anything for fear that I'm saying something I shouldn't say.
Oh, that Studio Canal Blu-ray is crap. That was the original Blu-ray, right? Of
Haunted House of Horror. No, it was wasn't it Screenbound or one of those companies?
Yeah, I have that. I'll have to upgrade. I didn't know. I didn't. I'm glad I didn't watch that version then. So I'll get the '88 when I get a chance. If I can afford the tariffs.
Like, what? The sound is so bad. Like it's unbearable.
I have a couple like that. Appreciate you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have returned.
Lord.
Who might you be?
I was about to ask the same of you.
Be careful. decay. Now there's nothing but the stench of decay. Time has such little respect for man's vanity, such little regard for his possessions.
Listen,
Please don't interrupt me whilst I am soliloquizing. Where is the music now? The sound of laughter. There was never laughter.